Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now, when wildlife is in decline the world over, how do we raise more funds for conservation and ensure these funds are spent to have their greatest impact locally? Well, today's guest thinks she might have found the answer. Jade Brudenell is the Executive Director of the Conservation Collective, an organization with a mission to increase the amount of funding available for the most effective frontline nature restoration initiatives. They do this by connecting donors with a close affinity with a specific location with local foundations who then re-grant the funding to grassroots conservation initiatives to protect the environment, to restore nature, and to safeguard against climate change. It's a really innovative, scalable, and exciting model. Now, during the podcast, Jade tells us the story of the Conservation Collective, how it was founded, and how they are securing new funds within the sector to create more impact. We also discuss the importance of fundraising within the sector, along with her career story and what she looks for when hiring new staff. It's a wide-ranging, fascinating, and really honest discussion about one of the most important issues facing conservationists today: funding. Enjoy.
Okay, hi, I'm Jade Brudenell. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Collective.
Good to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining us, Jade. It's good to to chat and reconnect and to talk all about your work, really, and the work of the Conservation Collective. So where to start? Well, let's start with the Conservation Collective. Let's assume our audience know nothing about you and the amazing work you've been doing over the last few years. Tell us a little bit about the Conservation Collective, then. In a nutshell, what is the Conservation Collective? How do you work? What is it you're trying to do?
Okay, so we are a global network of local environment foundations, and I run a central team which helps to launch and support local environment foundations based all over the world in really horrible places like Barbados and Mallorca and Ibiza. We now have about 18. And really, we're kind of trying to focus on two big challenges that face the environmental sector. One, how do you get more money into projects, and how do you get that money into the hands of the people who are best placed to deliver change? And we think we've got the kind of formula for both. And raising more money, we think, is our place-based focus. So there's this horrible statistic of less than 3% of philanthropic giving that goes to the environment versus something like 20% that goes to the arts. How do we get more people to give funds? Well, we think that by connecting people to a particular place and kind of really tugging on the heartstrings of somewhere that people really care about, they're more likely to give. It's much more likely, if you're asked to support your local school or the community centre, that you might dip into your pocket than if you were someone who was asked to support fighting tropical deforestation, because it's so far away, whereas we really feel for the things that are close and things we care about. So we connect people to places to raise the money, and we do exactly the same to give the money out. We find the people who are closest to the issues locally, the grassroots organisations who are kind of fighting themes that, degradation of the riverbanks here in Hampshire would be an example. If it's in Mallorca, it's the plastic washing up on the shores of the bays.
Fantastic. And that's a great, in a nutshell, description of who you are and what you do. Thanks for that. And I was reading also about your kind of origin story, I guess, is that your founder started off with a real connection to Ibiza and collected together a group of his friends who then seeded donations and started a foundation there. And that's where things spiraled from. So that's that kind of close connection between the founder and the place.
It's a funny one. So Ben Goldsmith is our founder. He's a kind of lifelong environmental philanthropist and investor. And actually, he didn't have a direct connection to Ibiza. He'll say that he was on a stag party, which he apparently hated. And he and his friends noticed the stark difference between the kind of overdeveloped south of the island and the really wild, beautiful natural coasts and kind of ecosystems in the north. And he sort of put it to them as, who's doing anything to make sure that in 10, 15, 20, 50 years, those northern coasts are still wild? And the answer was like one or two little groups that are massively underfunded. And when you think about how much money is on an island like that, that was kind of crazy. So he got 10 friends to put 10,000 euros into a pot every year for a kind of minimum of 3 years. And they hired a local director whose job it was to go out there and meet anyone working on projects in this space and kind of map out what were the key environmental issues and challenges and opportunities on that island. And last year, Ibiza Preservation gave away something like €500,000 So they're
Wow.
doing great things. They're now focused around 4 themes, which is Posidonia, seagrass protection, plastic free, kind of business alliances, a sustainability observatory, which brings in data around kind of research around different metrics to do with sustainability, which should hopefully kind of both raise awareness and works with media, but also feeds into policy.
Yep.
And then there's a 4th one that just skipped my mind for a moment. Local produce. So kind of promoting more organic and local producers on the island to actually be fed into the restaurants, which are mostly kind of importing from overseas.
Fantastic.
So we set up Ibiza and groups of friends of Ben's who have places in the Aeolian Islands, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, other places over the next few years, said to him, look, I think I'd like to do what you've done there. Can you help me? And it was in 2017 when I was sort of doing something slightly different. I'd worked with Ben in the past, but I was doing something slightly different. He called me and said, look, I think I'm onto something, but I've got way too much on my hands. And if anyone in this sector has heard of Ben, which they might have, you'll see he's got about 14 different things he works on and is incredibly energetic. But he said, would you help me? I really want to trial replicating this model in other places which might work for us. And so we went about 2 or 3 years trialing and testing with different groups of people from in island archipelagos in Greece, in the other Balearic Islands, and it kind of snowballed from them.
Right. Yeah. It's a great way of kind of describing how things have started and grown out. Oh, I'd really like to understand the kind of the model of how you go about establishing a local foundation, how those funds are secured, and then how they're then spent, if you like. Where does the money go? Who uses it? How is that sort of identified? Can we start with like the local foundation? So, what is a foundation in a nutshell? Is it a conservation organization or is it a channel for funding? And how do you go about identifying them? You said they're all in horrible places. They all sound really beautiful places. Are they just holiday destinations that people are connected with, or there's lots of questions in there? But let's start with the foundation and how you choose the locations.
So we basically follow the money. Unfortunately, the environmental issues are everywhere. So we kind of take the easy route, as it were, and talk to people who have funds and who have connections to other people with funds, and kind of explore it that route. So we in Barbados, for example, we had a girl who was actually covering my maternity leave one year, and her family have a house in Barbados, and she said, I love what you guys have done. Let's go and talk to my parents and their friends in Barbados and see if we can do something similar. So her parents would have had a lunch party or something, got their friends around, and either sort of beamed Ben in via a Zoom link, or had Charlie, who was my maternity cover, speaking at the time. And slowly kind of built a bit of a consensus amongst that group and asked them, will you join? Will you bring your money, but also your energy and your connections to help us get this set up? And then what we at the kind of central team do is provide a bit of a toolkit. This is what we've seen work in the past. We help build their list of donors. We help research other kind of big names who we think should be giving but aren't giving. And so I do quite a lot of that kind of donor fundraising and kind of building what we call our steering committee, which is the subset of that group who join a quarterly call to make the decisions around how the projects are spent, how the money's spent. And as a foundation, it is mostly a re-granting organization. Our core model is that we raise the funds and we find the best people to give it out to. Now, the exception to that rule is that not everywhere is the same, and you have to have the flexibility to tweak it according to local context. So in Greece, for example, there's a really underdeveloped civil society. So we are actually sort of building from the bottom up projects, delivering and implementing, as well as re-granting.
Through the foundation or through starting a charity?
Through the foundation. So kind of working with local marine biologists or research institutions or whoever it needs to be, or women's associations or fishermen's cooperatives, whoever it needs to be to actually build the projects. And I think even though I say re-granting, because you're re-granting with very small grassroots groups, it is a foundation, but it's very hands-on for our local directors. They are, in some cases, even helping the applicant write the grant application form. They are, it's a very kind of, we're re-granting, but we're also kind of helping develop the projects.
Yeah. I was reading that you're quite small and nimble and you get stuff done. And that feels like a principle there, that you're looking to just make this quick and streamlined and really focus where it's needed.
Yes, and respond to what's needed. So, throughout the conservation sector, there is this horrible thing that NGOs are very competitive and not necessarily collaborative. And what we have found is by providing this kind of neutral platform where we're not competing with them, and that we are making, ideally, we're bringing new channels of funding to them, but we're also there to help, really, whatever it might be, help make an application to a big multinational, help introduce someone to someone in the local government, and kind of generally be there to help develop capacity. That's where we found we can be really helpful.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. And it makes me sort of reflect also when you talk about one of the major challenges about the amount of funds that go to environmental projects, so 3% compared to 20% for other issues. One thing that I think we see within the sector, and it relates also to kind of competition that you mentioned there too, is that there are limited funds, and we need to kind of grow that pot. And right now, we're trying to save the planet on our spare change, if you like. There's just this ceiling about how much we can raise.
Yeah.
And you think you found a new model which is much more about connecting individual motivation for, let's face it, wealthy individuals to fund things they really care about. And that's something that's largely missing right now, but it can raise that 3% to something much higher.
Yeah, we hope so. And it's kind of, we're constantly looking for kind of, if we're using financially terms, which so many of our donors, I guess, are kind of in the business community, kind of leverage and a multiplier effect. So if you have donors giving this 100,000 a year, what that really helps is to bring in kind of chunkier co-funders, foundations in America who may have no experience of what it's like to fund in Greece, then find us a kind of very reassuring bed partner, because we can say, okay, we're on the ground, we can monitor these projects. And that's a really nice way of bringing extra funding that would never have been there if it wasn't for these private donors kind of taking that early stage risk, I guess. And
these small charities, I guess, when they're starting out from scratch, they need like a funding history behind them of success, and you can get that success going and then attract the larger funds down the road when you kind of showcase, well, this is working, this model works. Come on, whoever it might be, Packard Foundation in the US, Pew, someone like that, put your hands in your pocket and fund more.
But I think, it's not just that there isn't enough money. Sometimes the money is sort of too large to meet the kind of smaller groups as well. So we have had situations where someone has said, I've got 5 million available to develop marine protected areas in Greece, go. And no one has a reality of the lack of capacity. There's no one to give that money to. I mean, yes, there are people I'm sure who spend that money very well, and I'd get told off for saying that, but it's not as easy as just hand the money over and get what you want overnight. There's so much on the ground building and kind of research and development that needs to be done. We have to kind of look at each place so carefully in its own context.
So let's talk about some of the kind of the projects and things that you've been doing as the collective. Have you got any kind of good examples about, projects that have started or programs that are underway that you feel are particular successes that kind of show the model in action to kind of bring it to life a bit?
I mean, one example I really like is a place called the Apricot Centre in Devon. It's a regenerative agricultural farm. And when we first met them, I guess 3 years ago, or even 2 years ago, it was 2020. So when we first met them, they had gathered something like 8 years worth of data on regenerative farming, which is quite rare, but they didn't have any funds to present it. So really the first grant we gave them was for a kind of graphic designer to pull that information together into a really nice report. Amanda, our local director there, spent a lot of time with the Apricot Centre and realized they could do so much more. And she always has this line, which is, what do you need from us to create more impact? And she just puts it very plainly. And they had an idea that they always wanted to set up a training academy. So we're now into the second year of, I can't remember the exact name of the school, but it's a regenerative agricultural training academy. And we have made it free to as many people locally as possible. And it combines kind of desk research and going to work hands-on on farms. And that's something that we could really see kind of growing, and also bringing in extra funding from the council and other organizations. And it's really exciting to see that going along now.
Yeah, that's great. And where do you see, so I'm right in thinking the charity was set up formally in 2020, I was reading on your site. The early idea was 2008, something like that. So you've been around a little bit longer. Where do you see things, I don't know, 5 or 10 years from now? I mean, what's the kind of the medium term ambition? I mean, obviously you're not committed to anything solidly, but where do you hope things to go?
I've got a kind of a theoretical number of 25 foundations by 2025. But in reality, I'd rather have 20 and have them all growing and doing amazing projects than just kind of adding, because we did go through this very fast growth phase, 2020 to pretty much now, and keep aspiring to consolidate and slow down, but the opportunities keep coming at us. So it's a really hard personal decision for me and Ben and the other trustees who want to see more and more of these things, but also having spoken with our local directors who we brought together for the first time this year in Ibiza for a kind of retreat or a 2-day gathering. They fed us some home truths, which is you guys need to slow down a bit, which is completely true.
Yeah.
So I think 25 by 2025 would be great. I think the trustees would like 200 by 2030, because in their mind, there is no reason why you wouldn't have a Hong Kong environment fund or a Manhattan environment fund, or we haven't even looked at kind of American at what to do in an American context. And for me, it's really about how can we really hone the support that we give centrally to make it something where we have kind of two options. Are we going to grow what we do as we're doing it now in a very hands-on way from the central team, or are we going to make it, I think Ben calls it the Alcoholics Anonymous model, where you literally have a kind of how to set up your own local foundation pack on our website, and it's a kind of toolkit people can download and off they go. And if we're really looking for scale, then the trustees get excited about kind of tech partners and how are we going to do this. But at the moment it's still the kind of block by block sort of building, and I've just started growing a team to build out our support system, so really honing the benefits that we offer as a network to the local foundations before we go to the next stage.
Yeah, exciting times, and presumably quite stressful as well with the growth that you've seen and the hiring of new people, which I'd love to talk to you about in a little bit too. What's fueled the growth? Is it the network of individuals that come along saying, I want to fund this, and by the way, I've got 5 other friends that are interested and they've got 5 other friends? Is it that? It
was largely that for a couple of years, and we were really responding to people coming back saying, I've just been staying at my friend's house in Paros in the Cyclades. I'd like to do this in another island grouping in Greece, and by the way, my brother has a big estate in Scotland and they'd really like to do something up there. So there was a really kind of snowball word of mouth to begin with. We also had a kind of varied model where a big foundation called the Marver Foundation, who you're probably familiar with, came to us saying, I think they're shutting down at the end of this year, which has sort of always been in their trajectory, but they said it'd be great to work with you to set up local foundations in places where we work to ensure a future revenue or kind of place where our grantees and local partners can go to for funding in future. And they kind of mapped out the Aegean coast of Turkey, Cyprus and Croatia with us. And this has been a really good learning curve for us, because it's not the route we should go next time. Because when the people come to you with the funds ready to go and the connections, it's a very easy kind of or good synergy to fit in with the skills and the, I guess, the tools that we have. When we have to start from scratch, it is very time consuming on our, Ben and I do not have necessarily the network there. So we're Googling Croatia's rich list and kind of scrabbling around for introductions. And we found an amazing, that being said, Cyprus is now up and running and doing some really cool things. This afternoon, we have our first grant giving meeting for the Turkey Fund. Croatia is slow, but I think we'll get there. We have one really brilliant JP Morgan banker who's kind of running through his Rolodex, contacting people for us. And we have a local director identified who's kind of working on developing the projects there as well. So I think it'll happen, but from a CC capacity and me kind of running a budget and a team, we've realized that is really draining on our time.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that then. Let's talk about you and your team. So your role is executive director. What does that mean? What does that entail? Kind of paint us a fairly honest, transparent picture about what your job's like, as much as you want to share.
Yeah. So I guess a year ago, it was just me and not a year ago. The beginning of 2020, it was just me. Then it was me and an intern until the end of 2020. Then 2021, we hired a network director who was a girl that Ben and I had both worked with before 10 years ago. So that was brilliant. We had the kind of beginnings of at least the two of us doing things. And as we built out more external funding, which has been really kind of brilliant and quite humbling to bring on like Sif and Marver and Oak and some really kind of what we feel as big names in this world supporting our kind of little crazy idea. We've managed to grow a team. So what I do day to day has gone from being really fundraising for the local foundations and hand holding for the local directors. I spend a lot of time on Zoom and on the calls with the directors, helping them get ready for board meetings, helping them put newsletters together. And so I was doing the kind of one-stop shop support system for them. And what I've now built my team out is we now have a marketing manager who's got templates and of newsletters and can help edit things and make things look beautiful. We've just brought on a program manager who can now help them kind of connect the dots in terms of the project. So say if you're looking at monk seal protection in Greece and Cyprus, she can now tell them to talk to each other. So I'm now kind of managing this team and building out the network benefits and the ways we support the foundation. So basically a lot of Zoom calls. My husband, who works in the seminar room, has said, you spend 80% of the time on the phone. I'm not surprised you don't have any time to do your work. So I am going to try and cut down Zoom calls because you do have so little time then working on the other things you need to do. So funding proposals and reports and I have gone definitely much more from the kind of doing side to a bit more management, which is getting a bit intimidating, which is why we from early conversations with you have set up this leadership training program, which I'm putting 7 of our directors and myself through in the next sort of 6 months.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting to hear how things have evolved for you as well, like personally in your role, and you're moving less away from the kind of front line and more to the kind of higher management and so on. What do you like enjoy about your role? Like what are the best bits of what you do?
Well, I work with such a range of incredible people, kind of from every corner of the globe, which I absolutely adore. So that's really fun. I am learning all the time, whether it's on the kind of more strategic management-y side or the actual content, because I'm looking at, we're reviewing 9 projects that come in from local foundations in Turkey this afternoon and hearing expert opinions, hearing from local advisory councils over why this turtle conservation methodology is better than this one. So I love, getting sort of down and dirty with the projects is fun. And the bit that I panic about not having enough time for anymore, because that's where I used to kind of have poured through in detail every application we received, and now I'm lucky if I get 10 minutes to flick through the projects before the call. So those, I think the people and the kind of learning part is what I really enjoy.
You can probably guess what my next question would be then. What
do I hate?
what are your challenges? What do you not like?
So I think as things get kind of more grown up and bigger and scarier, then obviously the kind of responsibility is kind of anxiety provoking. I have been very lucky to bring on an excellent financial director who joined in May, because when you start kind of just overlooking a simple spreadsheet of money in and money out, that's fine if you don't have much accountancy training. But a couple of years down the line, when it all becomes a bit more complicated with ring fenced and unrestricted this and restricted that, and we just actually had our first full audit, because the year before we were kind of under 1 million income. This last year we were over 1 million. And I'm very happy to have someone else support me in that, because that's quite a stressful area. I found. And I think it's not so much I don't enjoy, but definitely one of the challenges, or what I'm kind of scratching my head over, is how we retain our kind of innovative, entrepreneurial, reactive side whilst growing and seeing the restraints that you need to put in terms of systems and processes and risk management. And the kind of pushback that I get from some of the directors on that is already quite kind of apparent, that we need to protect, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We need to protect each other from one foundation having a kind of scandal from taking funding from someone on a red list or something like that, by putting in guidelines on who will take money from. But equally, if you're a local foundation, occasionally they can see what we're trying to do is becoming a bit restrictive and a bit top heavy, and I'm really keen to not be top heavy. We want to be a kind of federation of organizations, and we just help share best practice. And that kind of balance between growth and getting it right, but not not restraining the kind of innovation is something I'm battling with a bit.
Yeah. Growing, but also being nimble. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. So you've grown, you've got 6 staff now, or is it 6 of you in total over the last year or
6,
so? Yeah. How do you go about hiring new staff? You've always spent a lot of time recruiting people in the last year or so.
Yeah.
What's your process? What have you learned through that? What would you like to share with other people who might be looking to kind of work in this sector?
Yeah. How have we done it? I mean, the first, if I'm completely honest, the first 2 or 3 basically came to us at the right time.
Yep.
We had money available. We had half started looking, and because of Ben's connections in this place, people constantly sending him CVs and things. So he's always forwarding them on, and I occasionally see things coming through. So our first kind of intern who joined us, it just happened that way, and that was great. Since then, obviously, we've become a bit more of a professional outfit. We've then started recruiting more formally. So for our marketing manager last year, I think we went through Escape the City, but in the end, it was more that we shared our kind of LinkedIn link with every big foundation we work with, and in the end, it came through a contact at Blue Marine Foundation, who we work closely with. More the interesting one more recently is this year we've hired a kind of team assistant, a finance director, and a program manager, and we actually decided to go and post on, I can't remember the names of the websites, but 3 or 4 kind of actually paid up, try and really widen the search. And 2 then found us through LinkedIn. And so it was completely a different way. And one was a personal introduction. So
and what do you look for in people? Yeah, when apart from like the specific skills of the role, it's fine. What are the kind of the character traits, or what are the successful candidates? What's standing out that they have?
Well, because we are a kind of entirely remote model, it does have to be. It's not for everyone. In fact, we had someone on our team as a finance manager before who left in May, who was great, and it was more that she really wanted to be in an office again, and I can't argue with that one. We're not ever going to be able to provide that, or I don't think that'll be till quite a lot further down the line. So someone who's happy with the remote working and who has the skills to do that, because we all know it is quite hard, and has, I guess, an element of interest in working in a kind of entrepreneurial environment, because I think it might look like we're a done deal and a fully built charity, but actually we're still really putting a lot of the processes in place. So I think kind of being willing to join an early and growing team, and people, what I absolutely love about the kind of 3 that have joined this year is that if we identify as a group a piece of the puzzle that needs developing, they'll just go off and do it, and not kind of wait for me to lead. I might say this would be great if you could do this, but for someone to take on that by themselves and come back to you and be like, right, I've got 3 quotes from new IT providers, I think these guys are the best. Excellent. For me now, that's just like the best weight off my mind. And for people to not be embarrassed to say kind of, Jade, why are you working with this organization? They're charging you way too much. And I just say, I haven't had the time to do the full kind of check through, and really helping me to kind of make sure that the organization is run really efficiently. I think that's brilliant.
Right. So you want someone who's sorry, go
on. So no, it's just kind of coming at me with new ideas, working independently, being given a kind of, we have a plan of what we're trying to do, but we're also quite opportunity led. So we come across a lot of opportunities, which is exciting. So if I say I'm thinking of developing a partnership with these guys, but we'd need to do a couple of these things first, to know that you can just rely on someone who can manage their weekly workload, but also just follow a lead and go with it.
Yeah. And are you hiring from within the conservation sector, or are you bringing in expertise from outside in?
We hadn't. Actually, I think it's about 50-50 now. So our program manager, who we've hired recently, she was very much from within, and I felt that was really important for a program manager type role. For marketing and our network director and finance, it's a bit more broad. But it, because I've kind of made it up as I've gone along. I've never had formal training. I worked in environmental investment before, doing marketing and investor relations, but I love having people on the team who've done Cambridge sustainability courses and other of these programs, because obviously they bring other skills.
Yeah. So let's talk about your background then. So what steps have you gone through in your career what are the key steps when you look back? What are the 3, 4, 5 key things you've done that kind of led to where you are now? You mentioned you're in investor relations and marketing. What have been the kind of key things?
I started helping run a conference in Monaco, which for clean tech ages ago. And I think that was relevant not only for the kind of sector, but also for kind of sales and sponsorship and funding. It was all kind of, I can see a lot of things that I do now were relevant then.
Yeah.
And I think I've always done, I've always tried to combine that kind of quite entrepreneurial approach with a quite kind of serious systems and management approach. And so when I moved to Web, which was the investment firm that Ben launched, and myself and Kendra, who we're working with now, and our IT guy, we were all there. So we slightly brought the band back together. But even there, it was a lot of, I think, okay, what am I trying to say? Not being scared to really start bottom up. I mean, I had pages of cold call lists to people to try and sell an investment fund to, and I didn't really know that much about investment. So it was kind of really kind of learning to have the gift of the gab, not feeling like any job was too below me, but equally having the confidence to then go to a donor dinner and sit down and speak to a real range of people. So I think that was a huge amount of really useful experience at a very kind of early stage in my career, and I got to learn a lot there. And Claire Brooke, who led the team, who's now the CEO at Bloom Marine Foundation, and Ben were great people to kind of follow around to meetings, because they just are brilliant at pitching stuff. So that was really useful. And then I went and had a career break and set up a food delivery service at Gales. I say career break, not a career break, career swerve. At Gales,
still working.
You're still working, but I was selling sandwiches rather than investment funds. And I thought I wanted to work in restaurants, and then realized how stressful hospitality was. And that was sort of when I was off having babies, and I was just really lucky that Ben called me at a time where I wanted to do something more flexible. And I was able at the beginning of this to just do, I think it was kind of 1 day a week, and then 2 days a week, and then fast forward to today where it's full time.
Yeah. Interesting how it's grown. Yeah. And it keeps growing. Now you're 6, and who knows where it's going to be. Yeah. I guess as we sort of start to kind of wrap up the conversation, I'd like to talk a bit more generally, I guess, about fundraising within conservation. It's so important. We did a bit of review of the kind of key skills that organizations look for when they're hiring conservation staff across lots of different role types within the sector. And some things jumped out to us, like project management was really important. People hire people with good project management skills. Communications, you've talked about newsletters already in marketing, it's a kind of core skill that I'm sure many of your directors need on the ground. But fundraising is like the third pillar, I guess, of like lots of different skills that's in there. How important do you feel like fundraising skills are specifically for the conservation staff on the ground? And what are some sort of challenges faced around finding funds beyond philanthropic funding that we talked about largely today, about other kind of fundraising avenues?
I think it's really important, because if I look at every different person in my team, not all of them need to know how to run a spreadsheet or write a newsletter, but all of them need to have fundraising in the back of their mind. When I first hired Kendra, our network director, having never fully run an organization like this before, I said, but I've only got funding for a year to keep you. Are you sure that's okay? And she was like, that's the nature of this job. I'm used to that. So people who work in the NGO world know that unless you're at a big endowment or something, that, you really have to fundraise for your own work. So that's sort of something that gets you out of bed in the morning, I think. And I think the local directors on the ground are more aware of that than anyone else. If they want to see a project and get it going, they know that they need to fundraise for it. And I think what is very difficult when we hire our local directors, because their role is about 10 different jobs in one, is it's kind of impossible to find someone who can identify projects, build projects, oversee a grant management process, present to funders, run the fundraising, do the marketing, run the organization. But you find someone who's really good at one and then very passionate and open to learning on the other areas, then you're really lucky. And we haven't got it right every time, we've definitely had a few cases where people very much are one or the other, and they're not really open to becoming a kind of jack of all trades. But I think the fundraising side is super important to just have an eye out all the time on opportunities, to think that, yes, we're set up on a kind of philanthropic basis, but keep an eye on what other grants are available out there. Who are the big kind of national foundations who are looking at this space? Who else should I be thinking about tapping up for co-funding? After the life cycle of this grant, how is my grantee going to fund themselves, and how are we going to support them to make the transition to their next kind of opportunity without us, always having to keep them going. So that's really key. And we look at philanthropic funding, but we also look at partnerships. We do quite a lot with hotels and restaurants and travel companies, adding €5 to the bill per booking for a villa rental company, or €1 for the bill to restaurants, which is great and exciting. A hell of a lot of work behind the scenes and quite a lot of VAT and tax stuff you have to think about, but really, really good, and good for visibility. Quite a few pitfalls you can fall into with kind of greenwashing and who you work with that we have to think about as well. And then on the kind of grants or bigger organization side, it's kind of thinking about capacity and, can you really ask a small fisherman's cooperative in a certain area to apply for EU funding? How can you help them do that and put the structures in place? So I guess those are our kind of three bigger channels that we're looking at. And I think on the other big challenge facing this sector is this constant focus on how are you reporting your impact? And it is, Ben's example he always gives us, it's kind of nigh on impossible. It's not like building a hospital where you say, here's your $1 billion and here's your hospital. Environmental change takes a long time. And so we have quite a lot of work with philanthropic donors is kind of subtle messaging and education around indicators of change, rather than we've captured 20 extra hectares of seagrass or protected the seagrass, which has captured this much carbon dioxide. Because yes, we'd love to be in a position to report on metrics and data, and whenever we can, we do. But I think there's so much more around kind of behavioral change that, being sure that we're effective with our funding, and obviously making sure it's very targeted, but also knowing that you have to kind of take some risks and not always be in a position to fit a traditional funding impact reporting. That's what I find quite hard. And that's a big piece that we're kind of developing out at the moment, our own impact reporting, but it's difficult.
And just as a kind of, I guess, a closing question, just thinking about impact specifically, as a kind of conservation movement, we're full of impassioned, skilled, talented individuals that are working really hard trying to save wildlife, biodiversity, whatever we want to call it. But in general, globally, we're losing the battle. A lot of species are in decline. We hear the stats all the time. What does the conservation community, in your view, need to do more of or be better at to have more impact?
I think communicating the positive outcomes is really important, because when I speak to friends of mine outside of this sector, they just say, oh God, everything's very depressing, isn't it? There's nothing happening. But there's so much happening, and we all know that. Is it the Grist newsletter that always sends kind of 10? There's a newsletter that does like 10 environmental positive stories, and I think showing people,
aware of conservation optimism, but
showing people solutions is just going to be key, because I think as humans we find kind of too many problems overwhelming, whereas optimism and kind of tangible solutions we can really focus on. So species bouncing back, I think there was something about Nepalese tigers I got an email through this morning about, or even within our own Lanka Environment Fund, we're doing a big project around connecting wildlife corridors for leopards and conservation in the kind of tea plantations in Sri Lanka, and it's fascinating, and you do start to have small wins. So communicating those small wins, however small, I think is really important. What else could the sector do better? Probably it's the kind of working together as well, rather than working against each other. There are so many examples of organizations doing the same things but not connecting and not talking to people doing similar things.
And do you think that's because of they're competing over funding?
I think probably largely that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, Jade, it's been really nice to chat. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're a super busy lady, so I wish you all the best with the Conservation Collective and any growth and anything else that's going to happen in the kind of near future. If people want to find out a bit more about you and the Conservation Collective, where should we send them? Where should they go?
So our website, which is conservation-collective.org, and we've recently published a 2-year review. It's quite a meaty 60 pages, but you can flick through and find some positive stories in there, I hope.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, we'll put a link in the podcast as we always do. But once again, thank you for joining the podcast. It's been great to chat.
Thanks very much.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.